My name is Constance. On my birth certificate, it's Constanza, but Constance Mercurio Lynch. I was born on January 27th, 1930, and I lived in Piermont for about 25 years. Um, I have three brothers. I had three brothers, two have passed, and I have two sisters. I went to Tappan Zee High School. Well, the name was the Piermont High School, and I graduated from there. Um, I went to work the day after graduation for the Department of Labor. It was during the war. The veterans were entitled to 52 weeks at $20 a week, and I worked there for 6 years. And then Xerox Corporation moved into the county, and I was offered a job there, and I stayed for 27 years. During that time, I was offered a volunteer responsibility that I was very happy to accept, and it was the Xerox Community Involvement Coordinator. And what Xerox entitled me to do is if we could get the members, the employees to give of themselves to the community, they would match whatever money we made. So for 27 years, at least 3 or 4 different organizations, heart, cancer, handicap, whatever the needs were, Xerox was wonderful. They were lucky, the county was lucky to have them. As a matter of fact, I remember the United Way of Rockland County started back then, which was about 1967, 68. So I was there for 27 years, and I enjoyed the community activity. It was really wonderful. Uh, what was interesting is where the kids today want to go down to the shore, I went to work the day after I graduated. Okay. Um, so when I met my husband, we were married. Um, we had 5 children. I had 4 girls, 1 boy. And I took the boys in to make George happy from St. Dominic's Convent in Blauvelt. At the time, my mother had passed, and she had a sister that was born handicapped, and we called her Zia, Zizzy in Italian. And Zizzy loved my husband, and there was no discussion about who was going to take Zizzy. So Zizzy lived with me for 18 years before there was no question she couldn't stay in a house with stairs and was having some handicaps. So we put her in a nursing home. It was the saddest day of my life. However, I did the best that I could. When I look back and I wonder how I did working full time with the kids and traveling and all that, I can only say it's the footprints in the sand. My higher power is very important to me. I was a member of St. John's Church all my life and belonged to the Catholic Daughters, and I am the oldest living Catholic daughter in Piermont. I'm there 72 years. So, now my husband went to, well, he went to Tappan Zee or Piermont, but he left because it was during the war and he volunteered to go into the Navy. And we were married, we would be married now about 72, 73 years, okay? He was very, very active in the Piermont Veterans of Foreign Wars, post 7462. The veterans were very important. And during his time, they bought a building in Piermont, which is right across from where my mother had her other 4 children. But unfortunately, just this past week, the veterans from Piermont have disbanded because of membership lack of. The title on the cover is VFW, Our First Century, 1899 to 1999. And if you were in Piermont, you'd be very proud to know that we are in the book and the only one from Rockland County. And we were honored. And the reason why we're in there is because we donated the most money in the country for Oklahoma City.
The bombing.
The bombing, yeah, yeah. And what I remember specifically, because we took coffee cans and we wrapped red, white, and blue. We went to the different stores and put the cans there. We put yellow ribbons on the telephone pole. I mean, patriotism, which we don't see today, was here in Piermont. And
The smallest.
and we, the ladies auxiliary and the men, were the significant part of that is we were the smallest group in the country, and we gave the most money. And I believe that I'm not sure that they have the amount there because we got some money in late, but it ended up being $8,000. And everybody came, and it was a delight, you know. I know that in that parade on VJ Day, in the picture here, there's the car, and the car has the Gold Star mothers, Mrs. Hogan, Mrs. Goswick, Dorothy Clark, her foster son. So you see that car, that's something also. Well, what I want to tell you specifically on that day, I am carrying, what we did was we had the victory. We all carried a letter, and I'm in there, I'm carrying the I, okay? Now, when the parade, we were given instructions when we got to the, where we could drop off the parade was in front of the Piermont police station today. So we got off, and I'm standing on the sidewalk, and I see my friend Junior Cook. Now, I'm not sure that I remember this, but right after I graduated and I went to work, I don't think I mentioned this in the right order, but the first job I had, this was before I graduated, I was 13. I worked in a restaurant, and I was a dishwasher. And I did that for about 2 weeks. And the owner said, Connie, I think you could be a waitress. Mind you, 13, but it was during the war. You talk about jobs hard to get. Anyway, the woman that worked in the kitchen was Aunt Jemima with the handkerchief and the beautiful face. And she was African American, and she did all the cooking by herself. And she asked me if I could help her get her grandson a job as a dishwasher. Now, growing up in Piermont, we lived right across from Leonard Cook and many of the African American. We didn't have this situation. Here in Piermont, you could smell my mother's garlic and meatballs, and there we could smell the fried chicken with the Black people living across. Our doors were open. We had no problem, okay? Now, when Mrs. Cook asked about the job, the owner said, of course, if it was her grandson, she was bringing her grandson up. Okay, so Junior Henry Cook came, he was a junior. His father worked in Robert Garrett, the factory that is now the fancy place, right? Okay, I saw Junior. He was over by Community Market today, which back then was called Ripples. I said, Junior, and I extended my hands. What are you doing down here? And so he crossed the street, and now I've got my arms extended, and he's coming towards me, and I see a fist go past my face. I turned around, and I see this animal. I don't want to call him a person, but I recognized him. He was my father's boss. My father worked at Garris. And I turned around and I said to him, why? did you do that? And he said, and Junior is saying, Connie, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry. And he looked at the guy that punched, turned around and said to me, you shut up, go home and tell your father what you did. So I went home. I told my father, and my father in Italian said, Bella figlia mi, dear daughter of mine, someday you may understand. And today, with what goes on, and I remember, however, my dear friend Henry is in my heart, in my prayers. He went off to Korea and he did not come home. Now, this past Memorial Day, Junior Cook was honored. There is a cemetery in Nyack where I forget the name, what they call the Buffalo Soldiers. The Buffalo Soldiers are where the African Americans are buried, and there's not that many of them, but Junior Cook is there, and they honored him. And I wanted to go there. I would have walked the distance. However, unbeknownst to me, the Piermont Fire Department, they had to convince me to stay home. I didn't know it, but they came to my house with 4 fire trucks and got out and saluted me. So Junior Cook would understand that. He would tell me, Connie, it's okay. But for the record, he's in my heart and in my prayers. Unfortunate that while I did not have a problem, my family didn't, the Piermont group there didn't. I mean, the football players didn't. What's happening today is not the norm. And I pray that it go back to what we had in Piermont. We were blessed with the Leonard Cooks. And just Sunday, they put up a sign where the AME Zion churches, and guess what? On the sign, it is now Reverend Sanders Way. So much for the AME Zion Church, where I also was awarded the Martin Luther King Award in 2001. An article about the 100th anniversary, the celebration of the reenactment of the picture was taken May 15th, 1951, of the New York and Erie inaugural, the ride to Dunkirk on the lake. A photo of the reenactment with the appropriate clothes that they wore. And I remember the mayor of Piermont being Mr. Hogan. He lost a son during the war, and they have not yet recovered his body. So that is something we're still working on. Here is the picture of what Lolo got that excited about. There's another picture I have here of the convent. Oh, yeah. Now, this picture may not be fully qualified to be in your story. I feel it's important because every day, this picture is of St. Agnes Convent in Sparkill. However, these boys were part of Piermont High School, and they walked from Sparkill through Piermont in the rain, no cars, no kids with cars. These kids were left off as orphans, and they were part of Piermont's history. Somebody knew about how wonderful the Piermont VFW post was, and they approached my husband and they said, we've heard about the good things you guys in Piermont do. Could you come over and maybe take a look at the boys from the convent? They had about 35 of their boys go off to war. They didn't come back, and nobody ever included them in anything. So I know that this is about Piermont, But these boys were a very important part of Piermont every day. Those nuns did the best they could, but I thought it would be appropriate to show the picture is beautiful, okay? But there were so many things that the VFW did for the veterans and for any need, okay? One of the things that we did for the veterans, I have this letter and it says, Dear Connie and members of the VFW, thank you for coming to it's called the Joseph Conway Home. That is outside of Rockland State Hospital. They had closed down some of the Rockland State Hospital, the mental health area, but they opened up this house and they called it the Joseph Valentine, am I sure? The Joseph Conway Home. And this is a thank you note because we gave them a Valentine party. And it was beautiful because I was able to get shirts, ties, sweaters, all donated. And we folded them in such a way. And one of my friends went to ShopRite and she kind of helped herself to some of the plastic bags. So we put them in bags and they looked almost like brand new. So every one of those clients there, and that Joseph house was in bad shape. In addition to my involvement at St. John's, I was on the outreach committee. And I had a friend who did selling carpets. And when I looked at that Joseph house, the carpeting in there was disgraceful. So my dear friend, Ted Simone, a lot of us know who Ted Simone is and the wonderful singing and buzz. I said, Ted, as part of outreach, he used to volunteer and come with me. And I can tell you some very funny things we enjoyed having. Anyway, I said, could you come? Because if we can get the old carpet up, I have a friend who's going to install new. So if you go now, this is 20 years, 30 years later, but we also gave them sweaters and shirts and things like that. But Ted said to me, don't ever ask me to do that again, because he had allergies and it was that bad. But we got new carpeting, we painted the rooms, and that was just one of many things, that we could do. One of the things that my husband was very, very concerned about, he wrote a letter to the Journal News, to the editor, dated June of 2007. And here's what he said. Does anyone know why they call the 40 acres that sit on the mountainside of 9W Elementary in Piermont the cowboy fields? Well, he goes on to tell you why. Because as a child growing up, they didn't have what these kids today have, but they used to go up on the fields and play. And they play cowboy and Indians. And so therefore, if you're interested, there's a whole letter that he sent to the Journal News. So in this letter, George wrote, in those days, the Erie Railroad ran many trains on the tracks just below the cowboy fields. Hobos, as we called them, used to ride the trains or walk the railroad beds. It was very common for them to pick a spot on the cowboy fields and the patch together with the shacks for shelter. When those attempts were made, the kids would chase them off. I'm writing this because it would be a terrible mistake for Orangetown school system to sell this great acreage. At the time, there was a discussion about selling. Its pond and stream that could someday be returned to its original serene beauty overlooking Piermont and the Hudson Valley. Environmentally, it should be preserved and restored to its original state rather than be sold to developers. Now, with George as commander for many, many years, one of the last things that he did with his buddy, Teddy Jessup, I mean, back then, they were inseparable. We have pictures of the origin of how Last Stop USA was formed, right to the unveiling. And I'm going to present that to you to keep because I have copies of all of that. Um, I think everybody in Piermont, well, I shouldn't say that. There's always a few that have a different opinion about whatever, but I belong to the group of people that are very proud of Last Stop USA and to the work that they did while they could. And let's hope the next generation could follow in their footsteps. Okay. Oh, well, during the war, of course, um, we did a lot of good things too. My father was a air raid warden, and when the whistle blew, that was, we had to rehearse what to do. And all the lights went out and the shades were drawn, and we were laying on a bed with the windows open, and the air raid wardens would be dressed with white outfits so that in the dark you would know who they were. My father was one of the volunteers, and he was given an assignment down by the mine hole. But this one particular night, the guy that had my house assigned to him got sick. So they said to my father, John, instead of coming away, do the right in front of your house. Well, we didn't know that. So my sisters and I were laying on the bed, our heads hanging out the window, and we're whistling and flirting with the air raid guy. But he turned around. He said, you get back in that house. It was my father we were flirting with. But anyway, I did make note that during the war, we did make cancer pads. We went down to the village, and Mrs. Georgette Hughes, God love her, she was the teacher, and we did that. Um, During the war, there was a basketball team at Rockland State Hospital, and the Piermont CYO would go there during the war. The neighbors in Piermont, it has changed. Is that not, I walk down Main Street in Piermont today, there's not one family left. Back then, they were all like family. There was no problem. We loved and cared for each other. They looked out for each other. Um, we had a milkman. We had a man carry a suitcase that he would sell anything people would buy. Okay. I remember that in March, our neighbors, the Hardys, would set out their nets out in the waters to do the fisherman stuff. And we'd all wait for the fish to come in so we could buy it and eat it. One of the important holidays was, for the Italian families anyway, was the celebration of St. Joseph's. It followed St. Patrick's Day. And today there's a bar and grill and a restaurant in that building, but that's where Piesco's Bar and Grill was. And they used to hire a band, and we'd be throwing confetti and doing the Italian dance. And we did celebrate, which was memorable. I'll tell you, this is kind of, I'm not happy to talk about it, but in the Italian custom, not all over, but in many places, they have this thing where some people they feel that they have a power, and they call it malaloik, bad eyes. We, in my family, unfortunately, we had a sad situation. In town, my brother-in-law was the superintendent of highways in Piermont. And he had an employee who was not doing what he was supposed to, and he was fired. Because it was my brother-in-law, the boy that was fired, his mother came to my mother's house to do malaloik. She wished us all the bad. And unfortunately, it was frightening because we don't believe there's only one person that has power, and it certainly wasn't my neighbor. But unfortunately, as things worked out, it's a custom that some people still do. And if you do it with humor, but with us, it wasn't humorous because the day after we had a tragedy in our family. But we never, whenever we saw them or a member of their family, it did not go well. But that's what they call Malaloy, bad eyes. Okay. Um, Living where I was, we had 3 or 4 African American families living there. And the one family had one son, and they could afford to buy comic books. My mother and father did not buy comic books. They would buy a sack of beans, or we would go to Howard's farm and pick 30 bushels of tomatoes to do, but this family could afford to buy comic books. So I would go there and lay on his bed and read comic books. But there's a situation where they afforded something that my mother would never think to do. But again, we had that kind of a relationship. For New Year's Eve, our fun was we had to be home by 12 o'clock. And when we got home, and we honored that, we knew that was important. We had pots and pans and we made noise and they shot off the guns. And that's how we did New Year's Eve. I'm sure it's not that way. And for Christmas, we hung our cotton stockings and we got chestnuts and pennies. And we had friends come over that played the Italian song on the accordion. Entertainment. We didn't have television. Okay. And I think, oh, with my mother, God bless her, she walked to Nyack. There was a factory there, and she would sew buttons, and it was called piecemeal. And if there was no work, she'd walk back and pick dandelions, and that's what we were fed. How different today, where the kids have cars and everybody has a TV. And anyway, one thing my father made sure we all knew: the bad mushrooms from the good mushrooms. And we went and picked mushrooms every July, August, and we would put them in mason jars with salt. Yeah. And we knew there were some that we definitely didn't. We never had that problem. Okay. And I think that my notes I've covered, and if I've missed out on anything, I'll leave you some messages. Okay. Thank you for your help, Betsy.